Crystal shrieked so loud the entire lake heard her calling me a criminal trespasser. What happened next still gives me nightmares. This platinum blonde maniac grabbed my moving boxes and hurled them straight into the mud, glass shattering as her designer heels stomped through my grandmother's photo frames. She was grinding precious memories into dirt while screaming about property violations like some deranged HOA dictator. The smell of her sickeningly sweet vanilla perfume, mixing with those crisp October pine needles, made my stomach turn. Standing there watching this destruction, my mouth went dry with the bitter taste of defeat before this war had even started. But here's what Crystal didn't know. She'd just picked a fight with the wrong person. What would you do if your dream retirement became a living nightmare on day one? Drop your wildest neighbor horror stories below, because what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me your location. Does your area breed Karens? This absolutely unhinged? Let me back up and explain how my perfect retirement plan became a living hell in under 10 minutes. I'm Jake Morrison, 58, and I'd just escaped 30 years of running Morrison construction. You know the drill, fixing other people's mistakes, dealing with permit offices that move slower than glaciers, and trying to explain to homeowners why their simple bathroom remodel somehow involves rebuilding half their house. My back was shot, my marriage was over, and I was ready for something completely different. So I sold the business, liquidated everything, and bought this dream lakeside cabin at Pine Ridge Lake. 20 houses scattered around crystal clear water, the kind of place where neighbors actually wave instead of pretending you don't exist. Kids catch bluegill off the community dock while their parents drink beer and argue about whose turn it is to host the annual fish fry. Pure small-town Wisconsin paradise. My cabin was absolutely perfect. Cedar siding weathered to silver, stone fireplace that actually worked, and a wraparound porch where I planned to drink coffee while watching sunrise paint the water gold. The plan was simple. Some light woodworking, maybe pick up consulting jobs when I felt like it, but mostly just exist without anyone screaming about construction deadlines. Then Crystal happened. She lived in what I can only describe as architectural revenge. This massive glass cube that looked like someone had dropped a Miami nightclub into the middle of Wisconsin. The thing probably cost more than my entire retirement fund and stuck out like a sore thumb among all the cozy lake cottages. Crystal herself was a walking contradiction. Early 40s pharmaceutical sales rep who dressed like she was permanently heading to hot yoga even when it was 40 degrees outside. Her white BMW SUV was so pristine, I wondered if she had it detailed daily. And somehow, and this is where it gets weird, she'd convinced herself she was the neighborhood's unofficial security chief, complete with the laminated neighborhood watch coordinator badge that she wore like it came with actual authority. The first meeting went sideways faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. I'd barely gotten my U-Haul backed into the driveway when I heard those designer sneakers crunching across gravel. The morning smelled like wood smoke and autumn leaves, with just a hint of that clean lake water smell that makes you want to take deeper breaths. Oh, are you the new renter? Sweet as pie, like we were old friends. Actually, I bought the place, Jake Morrison. I set down my box of power tools and stuck out my hand. Her face changed so fast I got whiplash. The smile vanished, replaced by this laser-focused stare that made me feel like I was suddenly wanted by the FBI. That's impossible. Not questioned. Stated, like I was trying to convince her the earth was flat. I know everyone who's supposed to live here. She actually demanded to see my paperwork, not politely requested. Demanded, like she had some kind of legal right to audit my real estate transactions. When I showed her the deed and purchase agreement, she studied them like she was authenticating the Declaration of Independence, muttering about property records and title searches. Her vanilla perfume was so thick I could practically chew it. Mixed with my morning coffee, it created this nauseating sweetness that coated my throat and wouldn't go away. Well, she finally said, handing back my documents with obvious disappointment, we'll see about this. Those 4 words carried more threat than a mafia warning. She strutted back to her glass fortress, each step deliberate and ominous, and slammed her car door hard enough to wake half the lake. That's when I should have realized Crystal Whitmore was about to become my personal nightmare. What I didn't know was that she was also about to make the most catastrophic mistake of her entire life. See, Crystal had no clue that her new problem neighbor happened to own a little real estate investment company, and she definitely didn't know that one of my rental properties was a certain flashy glass house at 847 Lakeshore Drive. The war was starting, and Crystal had just handed the enemy a nuclear weapon. Crystal wasted exactly 0 time turning my retirement paradise into a bureaucratic nightmare. Day 3 of living in what I thought was peace, and I found an official-looking letter jammed in my mailbox like a tiny paper bomb waiting to explode my morning coffee routine. Notice of Community Standards Violation #1 blazed across the top in angry red letters. Below that sat a grainy photo of my lumber pile, and by lumber pile, I mean the 20 pieces of cedar boards I'd neatly stacked against my garage to repair 3 broken deck railings. The complaint read like it was written by someone who'd never seen actual construction materials. Unauthorized building supplies creating neighborhood eyesore and diminishing property aesthetics. The fine? A casual $150 payable within 48 hours or face escalating enforcement actions. I read this masterpiece twice, wondering if I'd accidentally moved into some kind of Homeowners Association prison camp. Construction materials? I had fewer boards than most people keep firewood, organized better than the lumberyard where I'd bought them. But having dealt with permit offices for 30 years, I'd learned one crucial lesson. Never pay any fine without verifying who actually has legal authority to issue it. Too many contractors get scammed by fake inspectors and made-up violations. Time for a friendly neighborhood chat. Around dinner time, when the setting sun turned Crystal's glass monstrosity into a giant golden mirror, I walked over with the violation notice in hand. She was already watching through those floor-to-ceiling windows, probably been conducting surveillance all day, and opened her front door before I could knock. "Mr. Morrison," she said, my name dripping from her lips like she was announcing a war criminal. "I trust you received the community notice." "About this lumber situation," I said, keeping my voice level. "These materials are temporary for permitted deck repairs. I've got city approval, architectural drawings, the whole 9 yards. I handed her the official paperwork, stamped permits, signed contractor agreements, detailed repair plans. Crystal glanced at them for maybe 2 seconds like I was showing her grocery receipts. "Rules are rules," she declared, crossing her arms in that universal pose of petty authority. "Community standards must be maintained at all times. Pay the fine and remove the violation immediately." "What authority do you actually have to fine me?" I asked, genuinely curious about the legal framework of her little kingdom. That's when Crystal revealed her secret weapon. She reached inside her designer athleisure top and pulled out a laminated badge hanging from a professional-looking lanyard. "Neighborhood Standards Committee Chairwoman," it proclaimed in official font that probably cost her $20 at the local print shop. She held this thing up like she was flashing federal credentials. "The committee maintains full regulatory authority over all community violations. This system has been established policy for over 2 years." The smell of her vanilla perfume mixed with evening lake air created this cloying sweetness that made me want to step back. Something about this whole setup stank worse than week-old fish bait, and my contractor instincts were screaming that this was all smoke and mirrors. Next morning, I decided to conduct my own investigation. Started with Bob Henderson next door, retired postal worker who'd been watching Pine Ridge Lake drama unfold for 15 years. Found him in his garage, wrestling with a boat motor that sounded like it was gargling rocks and gasoline. "Committee?" Bob nearly spit out his coffee when I mentioned Crystal's official title. "Son, there's no damn committee. It's just Crystal with a laminator and delusions of grandeur. Turns out my neighbor had been running a one-woman protection racket for months." Bob showed me his own collection. Violation notices for excessive garden gnomes, non-regulation mailbox color, and my personal favorite, unsanctioned bird feeder placement. She'd hit at least 6 residents with made-up fines ranging from $50 to $200. "Most folks just pay up," Bob explained, wiping motor grease on an old rag. "Easier to fork over some cash than deal with her going full nuclear. Trust me, you haven't seen crazy yet." I remembered reading about similar scams in contractor magazines. Fake HOA presidents collecting thousands in bogus fines before disappearing. The pattern was always the same. Target new residents who don't know the neighborhood rules, create official-looking documents, and count on people paying rather than fighting. But Crystal wasn't finished with her campaign of manufactured authority. Day 5 delivered violation notice #2. This time for excessive noise during designated quiet hours. My crime? Running a circular saw on Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m., cutting deck boards in broad daylight while half the neighborhood was mowing their lawns. According to Crystal's imaginary rulebook, quiet hours ran from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. weekdays and 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. weekends. Basically, you could make noise only when most people were sleeping or at work. The logic was breathtaking in its stupidity. This fine had escalated to $300. That evening, I made a trip to the county courthouse, one of those imposing limestone buildings that smell like decades of legal battles and disappointment. Margaret, the records clerk who'd probably helped confuse property owners since the Carter administration, pulled up every official document related to Pine Ridge Lake under fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead. No registered Homeowners Association, she confirmed, squinting at her computer screen. No Community Standards Committee. No legal authority for private citizens to issue violations or collect fines. Crystal's entire empire was built on laminated lies and neighbor intimidation. But while I was sitting there in that musty records office, breathing air that tasted like old paper and broken dreams, I decided to check something else. My real estate company, Lakeshore Properties LLC, owned 12 rental units around the lake area. I'd been so focused on moving that I'd let Pinnacle Property Management handle all the tenant relationships and rent collection. Curious, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the tenant directory that I honestly hadn't looked at in months. Most addresses seemed familiar from my neighborhood drives, but one made my blood freeze solid. 847 Lakeshore Drive, Crystal's address, Crystal's Glass Palace, Crystal's Fortress of Fake Authority. My mouth went completely dry, that familiar taste of shock mixed with the metallic tang of absolute disbelief. The courthouse suddenly felt smaller, the fluorescent lights brighter, as the magnitude of this revelation crashed over me like a tsunami of irony. Crystal Whitmore, neighborhood dictator, self-appointed law enforcement officer, my personal tormentor for the past week, had been faithfully paying rent to a property management company that deposited every single dollar directly into my business account. She was my tenant, my renter, my source of monthly income. Crystal had just declared total war on her own landlord, terrorized the person who literally controlled her housing situation, and handed me enough legal ammunition to evict her sorry ass within 30 days. The best part? She had absolutely no clue what kind of nuclear weapon she'd just placed in my hands. You'd think discovering I was Crystal's landlord would give me some peace of mind. Instead, it just gave me front row seats to watch her completely lose her mind while destroying mine. Day 8 brought Crystal's masterstroke, digital warfare. I woke up to my phone buzzing like an angry wasp with 17 notifications from the Pine Ridge Lake Community Facebook group, a page I'd forgotten existed since house hunting season. Crystal had crafted what she called a community safety alert about her deeply concerning new neighbor. The post was pure evil genius. She'd photographed my truck, my toolbox, even my morning coffee mug sitting on the porch rail, spinning every innocent detail into sinister evidence. Suspicious surveillance equipment, my security camera, potential weapons storage, my perfectly normal garage, erratic behavior patterns, me drinking coffee at sunrise. The comment section exploded like a digital lynch mob. Neighbors I'd never met were suddenly forensic experts on my criminal psychology. "Something's definitely off about this guy," typed someone who'd probably never left their house. "We should all be documenting everything," added another keyboard warrior who'd apparently graduated from CSI University. Crystal was playing 4D chess while I was still figuring out she'd stolen half my pieces. But social media was just her opening move. Day 10, I discovered my truck wouldn't start. Popped the hood, expecting a dead battery, and found the cables carefully disconnected, not damaged, just professionally sabotaged. Someone had been under there with tools, and it wasn't the automotive fairy. Here's when my 30 years in construction kicked in. I'd dealt with job site sabotage before, disgruntled subcontractors, permit office revenge, the usual industry drama. The smart move was always documentation. So I installed a trail camera pointed at my driveway, hidden behind some decorative bushes Crystal would never think to check. 2 nights later, that camera caught pure gold. Day 12 brought the hose incident. I found my garden hose slashed in 3 places, basement flooding with enough water to ruin boxes of family photos I hadn't finished unpacking. The smell of soggy cardboard and destroyed memories filled the air like a funeral for my past life. But this time I had Crystal on video, clear as day, 2:47 a.m., creeping across my yard with a utility knife like some suburban ninja. Her platinum blonde hair practically glowed under my motion sensor lights. Day 14 delivered the garbage spectacular. I stepped outside for my sacred morning coffee ritual, the one thing preventing me from committing neighborly homicide, and discovered my lawn transformed into a landfill art installation. Torn bags, coffee grounds, rotting banana peels, and something that might have been expired yogurt created an aromatic masterpiece that had every fly in Wisconsin hosting a block party. More footage for my growing collection. But Crystal's nuclear option targeted what actually mattered. My business reputation. She'd somehow acquired my client contact list and launched a systematic character assassination campaign. "Jake, this is Tom Peterson," my phone rang during lunch. "Got a weird call from some woman claiming to be a concerned citizen. Said something about safety violations, unpaid debts, wondered if I should be worried about hiring you for the Miller kitchen." My stomach dropped through the floor. "Tom, that's complete nonsense. My licenses are current, insurance paid up, never had a safety violation in 3 decades. "Figured it was garbage," Tom said, "but she knew specific details about your work history, made it sound pretty convincing. By week's end, I'd lost 2 jobs worth 15 grand. Crystal was surgically destroying my livelihood while I felt helpless as a trout in a barrel. Then came day 16, the night that almost shattered my sanity completely. I was inside binge-watching cooking shows, trying to forget Crystal's reign of terror, when red and blue lights started strobing through my windows like a police disco. 2 squad cars in my driveway, Crystal standing on her porch in a bathrobe, pointing at my house with theatrical outrage. The knock had that authoritative sound that spikes your heart rate even when you're innocent. "Mr. Morrison, report of attempted burglary. Complainant says she witnessed you trying to break into her house around midnight." I stared at the officer, brain trying to process this fresh insanity. "Officer, at midnight I was watching the Great British Baking Show. I can pull up my Netflix history if you need proof." 20 minutes of awkward questioning later, the cops left with that expression officers get when they realize they've been weaponized by a neighborhood psycho. But that drama had shaken loose something important. Earlier, driving past Crystal's glass palace, I'd noticed a small metal lockbox hidden behind her landscaping. Property management companies use those for emergency access. I had them on all my rentals. The next morning I called Pinnacle Property Management, armed with new questions and growing suspicion. "Oh yeah, 847 Lakeshore Drive is definitely yours," Jennifer confirmed. "Crystal Whitmore, 8 months current. Actually, she's been calling our office a lot lately, complaining about some dangerous new neighbor disrupting the community. Wanted us to do something about it." The irony hit me like a freight train made of pure cosmic justice. Crystal had been calling my own property management company, demanding they take action against me, their actual boss, while simultaneously terrorizing me into leaving my own neighborhood. She'd been paying me rent for 8 months while waging psychological warfare against her own landlord. Tomorrow, it was time to remind Crystal exactly who held the keys to her perfect little world. Crystal's psychological warfare reached new levels of creativity that would have impressed military strategists. Day 20 brought her boldest move yet, weaponizing law enforcement through pure fiction. 3 a.m., my bedroom exploded with red and blue lights strobing through the windows like some kind of police disco from hell. I stumbled to the door in my underwear, heart hammering, wondering if someone had actually broken into Crystal's house this time. "Mr. Morrison, we've got reports of power tool usage disturbing the peace," the younger officer said, looking as tired as I felt. "Complainant says you've been running a table saw for the past hour." I blinked at him, still half asleep. "Officer, I've been unconscious for 6 hours. My table saw is unplugged in the garage. You're welcome to check." 20 minutes later, after confirming that my tools were indeed cold and unused, the cops left with that special brand of exhaustion reserved for dealing with neighborhood lunatics. This was the 4th bogus call in 2 weeks, and I could see them starting to hate Crystal as much as I did. But she was just getting warmed up. Day 22 brought city inspectors to my door, clipboards in hand, and expressions suggesting they'd rather be anywhere else. Crystal had convinced the building department that I was running some kind of underground electrical operation, creating fire hazards that threatened to burn down half the lake. The inspector, a grizzled veteran named Chuck who looked like he'd survived every construction scam ever invented, walked through my place shaking his head, the smell of his cheap coffee mixed with morning lake air as he checked my perfectly legal electrical work. "Someone's really got it out for you, son," he muttered, signing off on his report. "This is the 6th bogus complaint I've fielded this month about work that's clearly up to code. The inspection fee was $500, plus a full day of lost consulting time. Crystal was bleeding me financially like a slow leak in a tire, designed to deflate my life gradually. Then came day 25, Crystal's crowning achievement in community manipulation. I found the flyer taped to my front door like a legal summons. Emergency community safety meeting, addressing urgent neighborhood concerns. She'd somehow convinced the community center to let her book their main room, complete with projector setup and rows of folding chairs like she was hosting a town hall for local politics. That Thursday evening, walking into that room felt like entering my own trial. The air conditioning was broken, making everything smell like nervous sweat and stale coffee. 23 neighbors filled every chair, most studying their shoes rather than making eye contact with the accused criminal in their midst. Crystal stood at the front like a prosecutor, armed with a PowerPoint presentation that would have impressed corporate boardrooms. She wore a navy blazer that screamed professional authority and carried herself like someone delivering a TED Talk about community safety. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking her remote with theatrical precision, "tonight we address a situation that threatens our peaceful community." Slide 1 flashed on screen. My lumber pile, photographed from angles that made 20 cedar boards look like evidence of illegal construction. The dramatic lighting made my neat stack appear ominous and threatening. Slide 2, audio documentation of noise violations. She actually played recordings of my circular saw, complete with timestamps and decibel measurements like she was presenting evidence to a jury. Slide 3, eyewitness testimonials regarding concerning behavioral patterns. My stomach dropped as 3 neighbors, people who'd waved cheerfully just weeks ago, stood up with prepared statements. Mrs. Patterson claimed I'd been conducting surveillance activities at irregular hours. Bob Martinez swore I'd been photographing private properties for unknown purposes. Even young Sarah Olivia testified that my aggressive body language made her afraid to walk her dog past my house. Each testimony felt like a knife twist. These weren't strangers. These were people I'd hoped to build friendships with, now describing me like I was a registered sex offender who'd moved in next door. Crystal's finale was pure theater. Based on overwhelming evidence, I propose we formally request Mr. Morrison's voluntary relocation for the safety and well-being of our families. The vote wasn't close. 37 hands shot up out of 40 people present. I sat alone in the back corner, watching my new community unanimously brand me as a threat requiring removal. Crystal practically glowed with victory. "Sometimes good people must unite against those who would disrupt our peace," she proclaimed to enthusiastic murmurs. But here's what Crystal didn't know. While she'd been busy playing community prosecutor, I'd been conducting my own investigation. Those trail cameras had documented every midnight raid, every act of vandalism, every criminal trespass she'd committed. I had enough high-definition footage to fill a documentary about suburban terrorism. More crucially, I'd spent that afternoon at the courthouse again, this time armed with specific questions about tenant rights and landlord remedies. Wisconsin law was crystal clear about peaceful enjoyment violations. Tenants who harass neighbors can be evicted with cause, especially when that harassment targets their own landlord. As neighbors filed out, congratulating Crystal like she'd just saved them from disaster, I sat in my truck making the most satisfying phone call of my life. "Sarah Olivia Law Office," came the familiar voice of my attorney, ironically sharing a name with one of my accusers. "Sarah, it's Jake Morrison. I need advice about evicting a tenant for lease violations." After I explained the situation, Sarah was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she started laughing, deep, uncontrollable laughter that went on for nearly a minute. "Jake," she finally gasped, "your tenant just spent 3 weeks trying to exile you from your own neighborhood while paying you rent every month. This isn't just stupid, it's cosmic justice wrapped in legal documentation." Crystal had orchestrated her own victory party tonight. Tomorrow morning, I was going to serve her with eviction papers and show the entire community who'd really been terrorizing whom. The war was ending. and Crystal was about to discover she'd been fighting the wrong enemy all along. The next morning, I sat in Sarah Olivia's law office nursing bitter courthouse coffee while she spread Crystal's lease agreement across her mahogany desk like she was dissecting evidence from a crime scene. The morning sun streaming through her windows made the legal documents look almost holy, which was ironic considering we were about to destroy someone's life with them. "Jake, this is almost too perfect," Sarah said, running her finger down the rental agreement's fine print. "Look at Clause 14. Tenant agrees to maintain peaceful enjoyment of property for all neighbors and surrounding community members." I leaned forward, suddenly very interested in legal language I'd never bothered reading when I'd bought these rental properties years ago. "And here's the kicker," she continued, flipping to page 3. Clause 18. Tenant shall not engage in any activity that damages or threatens to damage the landlord's personal or professional reputation. Crystal hasn't just violated her lease, she's obliterated it. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Crystal had been systematically violating her rental agreement while paying me $1,500 a month for the privilege. "What are my options?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer from the predatory gleam in Sarah's eyes. "3 beautiful choices," she said, counting on her fingers. "Option 1, immediate eviction with cause. She's out in 30 days, no negotiation, no appeals. Option 2, we negotiate a private settlement where she stops the harassment campaign and you don't destroy her housing situation. Option 3. Sarah paused for dramatic effect, the way lawyers do when they're about to deliver the kill shot. Option 3. We let Crystal dig herself deeper while we document everything, then spring the trap publicly. Maximum humiliation, complete community vindication, and a lawsuit for damages that could fund your entire retirement." I thought about that community meeting, sitting alone while my neighbors voted to exile me like some kind of criminal. The taste of public humiliation was still bitter in my mouth, mixed with the metallic tang of righteous anger that had been building for weeks. "She destroyed my reputation in front of everyone," I said slowly. "Turned people I wanted to be friends with into a lynch mob. If I'm going down, she needs to go down harder." Sarah's smile could have powered half the courthouse. "Option 3 it is. But Jake, this means letting her continue the harassment campaign while we build an ironclad case. Can you handle more of her crazy while we set the trap?" I thought about Crystal's smug face at that community meeting, the way she'd basked in the applause like she'd just saved the neighborhood from a terrorist threat. The memory made my jaw clench hard enough to crack teeth. How long do we need? 2 weeks. There's another community meeting scheduled for the first Thursday of next month. Crystal announced it herself as a follow-up safety assessment. Perfect venue for a public reveal that'll make her previous humiliation look like a warm-up act. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and started sketching our strategy. We document every violation, every act of harassment, every penny of business you've lost. When she calls that meeting expecting another victory lap, we'll have enough evidence to bury her so deep she'll need archaeological equipment to find daylight. Here's what I'd learned from 30 years in construction. Sometimes the foundation looks solid until you dig deeper and discover it's built on quicksand. Crystal thought she was standing on bedrock, but she'd actually constructed her entire campaign on top of a legal sinkhole that was about to swallow her whole. The best part? She had absolutely no idea that her monthly rent checks had been funding the ammunition for her own destruction. Every dollar she'd paid me was going to finance the legal team that would evict her sorry ass and sue her into the next decade. Crystal wanted war. She was about to get the kind of total annihilation that would make military historians take notes. Building a case to destroy Crystal required assembling the right team, and I'd learned from construction projects that success depended on having specialists who knew their craft. Sarah Olivia was my legal general, but we needed foot soldiers. First recruit, Mike Rodriguez from Pinnacle Property Management. I'd worked with Mike for 3 years, and he had the kind of meticulous record-keeping that would make accountants weep with joy. When I called him about Crystal's situation, his laugh echoed through the phone like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Jake, that woman has been calling our office twice a week complaining about her dangerous neighbor," he said, papers rustling in the background. "She wanted us to terminate your lease. Didn't realize she was talking about the guy who signs her paychecks. I've got every conversation documented, time-stamped, and recorded." Perfect. Crystal had been creating evidence against herself while demanding we take action against me. Second addition to the team. My nephew Danny, 28 years old and a security camera wizard who could make surveillance equipment invisible to everyone except the people stupid enough to commit crimes in front of it. Danny arrived at my place that afternoon with enough tech gear to monitor a small city. "Uncle Jake, this is going to be beautiful," he said, mounting a camera disguised as a bird feeder on my oak tree. "Motion-activated night vision uploads everything to cloud storage she can't touch. If this crazy lady so much as looks at your property wrong, we'll have it in 4K resolution." Within 2 hours, my cabin was surrounded by an invisible web of digital witnesses that would record Crystal's every move. The cameras were so well hidden that even I forgot where half of them were. Next came the financial warfare preparation. Sarah walked me through calculating actual damages: lost business contracts, property repairs, legal fees, even the psychological trauma of being publicly branded a community threat. "Conservative estimate puts your losses at $27,000, she said, sliding the spreadsheet across her desk. "But that's just quantifiable damage. The harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress? We're talking serious money if we take this to court." I'd never thought of Crystal's campaign in purely financial terms, but seeing the numbers laid out like an invoice made my blood pressure spike. She'd cost me nearly 30 grand while paying me $1,800 a month in rent. The math was insulting. Then came the intelligence gathering phase. Bob Henderson, my neighbor who'd originally exposed Crystal's fake authority, turned out to be a goldmine of information. Sitting in his garage that evening, sharing beers while his boat motor gurgled like a mechanical patient, Bob revealed the full scope of Crystal's neighborhood terrorism. "She tried to recruit me 3 months ago," he admitted, peeling the label off his Budweiser. "Wanted me to file complaints about the previous tenant, some college kid who played music too loud. When he moved out, she took credit for protecting community standards." Bob had kept text messages, emails, even recorded phone calls where Crystal tried to organize other neighbors into filing fake complaints. The woman had been running a systematic harassment campaign for almost a year, targeting anyone she deemed undesirable. "She's got this whole system," Bob continued. "Fake violation notices, organized social media attacks, even calling people's employers with safety concerns. You're just her latest victim." The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. Crystal wasn't just mentally unstable, she was a serial neighborhood terrorist who'd perfected her methods through multiple victims. I was dealing with a professional. Sarah's research into precedent cases revealed that landlord-tenant harassment situations like ours were legal gold mines. "Wisconsin courts don't mess around with tenant harassment," she explained, surrounded by law books that smelled like old leather and justice. "Especially when the harassment targets the landlord. It's like suing your boss while he's processing your paycheck." We found 3 similar cases from the past 5 years. In each one, the harassing tenant ended up paying damages that ranged from $50,000 to $200,000, plus immediate eviction and permanent restraining orders. The psychological profile Sarah's consultant provided was chilling in its accuracy. "Classic narcissistic abuse pattern," Dr. Patricia Wells explained during our consultation. "The subject creates false authority, manipulates community perception, then escalates when challenged. They're usually successful because most victims give up rather than fight back." But Crystal had picked the wrong victim. I'd survived 30 years of dealing with corrupt building inspectors, dishonest contractors, and permit office bureaucrats who treated small business owners like criminals. After decades of navigating official harassment, dealing with one unhinged neighbor felt like batting practice. The final piece of our strategy involved timing. Crystal had announced another community meeting for next Thursday, her follow-up safety assessment, where she planned to review my behavioral improvements like I was some kind of paroled convict. Instead, she was going to get a public education about landlord-tenant law, property rights, and the legal consequences of waging war against someone who literally owned your house. We had cameras, documentation, financial calculations, legal precedents, and a community venue where Crystal would destroy herself in front of 40 witnesses. The trap was set. Crystal just needed to walk into it. Crystal's desperation reached new heights of creative insanity as she sensed something shifting in the neighborhood dynamic, though she had no idea what kind of legal hurricane was building around her glass palace. Day 40 brought her most audacious move yet. She called my insurance company. I discovered this when my agent, Tom Brewster, phoned me sounding confused and slightly annoyed. "Jake, I got the strangest call today from someone claiming to be a concerned neighbor. said you were running an unlicensed contracting business out of your home, potentially violating your homeowner's policy. I had to spend 2 hours reviewing your coverage and pulling inspection records to confirm you're not doing anything wrong. The call triggered an automatic insurance investigation that cost me 3 days of paperwork and nearly flagged my policy for review. Crystal was systematically attacking every aspect of my life, like she had a checklist titled, "How to Destroy Someone's Existence." Day 42 escalated to federal agencies. She filed an anonymous tip with the IRS claiming I was hiding unreported cash income and evading taxes on my consulting work. The letter arrived on official Treasury Department letterhead demanding documentation of all business transactions from the past 3 years. "Congratulations," Sarah said when I showed her the IRS notice. "Crystal just committed federal fraud by filing false reports with a government agency. That's a felony that carries up to 5 years in prison." While I was drowning in tax documents and insurance forms, Crystal launched her social media nuclear option. She created fake accounts on every platform: Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor, even LinkedIn, posting safety warnings about me across multiple community groups. The posts were masterpieces of defamation disguised as public service announcements. "Dangerous contractor operating without permits," read one. "Unstable individual threatening peaceful neighborhood," claimed another. She'd somehow acquired photos of my truck, my tools, even screenshots of my business website, weaving everything into a narrative that painted me as a threat to civilized society. My phone started ringing with confused clients and worried friends who'd seen these posts. 3 potential consulting jobs evaporated when homeowners decided they couldn't risk the liability of hiring someone with such concerning online reviews. But Crystal's physical escalation was reaching psychotic levels. Day 45, I woke up to find my mailbox reduced to twisted metal and splinters, clearly demolished with a baseball bat. The force required suggested she'd either recruited help or discovered some seriously impressive rage strength. Danny's hidden cameras captured the whole thing in glorious 4K detail. Crystal at 3 a.m., wearing all black like some suburban commando, swinging a Louisville Slugger with the enthusiasm of someone trying out for the major leagues. Day 47 brought automotive vandalism that crossed into seriously criminal territory. I discovered my truck's windshield coated with house paint, not spray paint, but actual latex house paint applied with brushes in deliberate strokes that spelled out "Leave" across the glass in dripping red letters. The cleanup cost $800 and required professional removal that left permanent scratches in the glass. More importantly, Danny's motion-activated cameras caught Crystal in the act, complete with audio of her muttering threats while she painted. Day 50 delivered the landscaping massacre. Crystal had somehow accessed my backyard and destroyed my sprinkler system with what appeared to be a sledgehammer, flooding my basement storage area and ruining boxes of family photos and documents that couldn't be replaced. The water damage alone cost $1,200 in repairs, but the destroyed memories were priceless. Crystal had crossed the line from harassment into genuine malicious destruction of irreplaceable personal property. Each incident was perfectly documented by Danny's surveillance network, creating a video library that would make prosecutors weep with joy. We had timestamps, audio recordings, and footage so clear you could see the serial numbers on Crystal's tools of destruction. But the most insidious attack came day 52. Crystal had somehow obtained my business client list and was systematically calling everyone, posing as a concerned citizen, warning them about my criminal background and unstable mental condition. "Mr. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Peterson Kitchen Remodel Project," came the call that nearly broke me. "I received some very disturbing information about your business practices and personal conduct. We've decided to terminate our contract and find another contractor." That was $15,000 in work, vanishing because Crystal had convinced them I was some kind of dangerous criminal. By the end of the week, my consulting business was essentially dead, murdered by a campaign of systematic character assassination. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for day 55. Crystal had filed paperwork claiming I'd threatened her with physical violence and stalked her property with recording equipment. The irony of a tenant filing restraining orders against her own landlord while simultaneously destroying his property was lost on her, but it wouldn't be lost on the judge. Sarah had prepared a counterattack that would make military strategists proud. When she presents her case Thursday morning, Sarah explained. "We're going to bury her in evidence of her own crimes. Every lie she tells will be contradicted by high-definition video footage." Crystal thought she was heading to court to get me banished from the neighborhood forever. Instead, she was walking into the legal equivalent of an ambush that would destroy her life in front of a judge, court reporters, and anyone else foolish enough to believe her lies. The war was almost over, and Crystal was about to discover that some enemies fight back with thermonuclear weapons. Crystal's final week of freedom played out like a disaster movie where the villain keeps escalating until they inevitably destroy themselves. She could sense the walls closing in, though she had no idea those walls were made of legal documents and high-definition surveillance footage. Day 57 brought her most desperate gambit: media manipulation on a scale that would have impressed political campaign managers. Crystal had somehow convinced Channel 12 News that she had an exclusive story about community safety concerns that deserved public attention. I watched in horrified fascination as the news van pulled up to her glass palace that evening, complete with a reporter I recognized from the morning show and a cameraman who looked bored enough to be covering his 1,000th neighborhood dispute. From my kitchen window, I could see Crystal holding court on her front lawn, gesturing dramatically toward my cabin, while delivering what appeared to be an Oscar-worthy performance of concerned citizenry. She'd changed into a conservative blazer and pulled her platinum hair into a serious bun, transforming herself from neighborhood terrorist into respectable community advocate. The story aired during the 11 o'clock news under the headline, "Neighbors Fear for Safety." Crystal's interview was a masterclass in manipulation. She never technically lied, but twisted every fact until I sounded like a dangerous lunatic who'd moved in to terrorize peaceful families. "We've tried working with him," she said, looking directly into the camera with practiced sincerity, "but his behavior has become increasingly erratic and threatening. We're just asking for our children to feel safe in their own neighborhood." The reporter had clearly bought her story completely. They showed footage of my perfectly normal property while Crystal's voiceover described concerning activities and potential safety violations. My toolshed became a weapons cache, my lumber pile transformed into evidence of unauthorized construction, and my morning coffee routine was reframed as surveillance activities. 3 neighbors appeared on camera supporting Crystal's narrative: Mrs. Patterson, Bob Martinez, and Sarah Olivia, the young woman who'd testified against me at the community meeting. All delivered sound bites about feeling threatened and unsafe since my arrival. The segment ended with Crystal's call to action. "Sometimes good people have to stand up to protect their community. We can't just hope problems go away." My phone exploded with calls from friends and former clients who'd seen the news. My reputation, already damaged by Crystal's campaign, was now destroyed on a regional level. Anyone Googling my name would find that news story suggesting I was some kind of neighborhood menace. But Crystal wasn't finished with her media blitz. Day 58 brought the ultimate escalation. She'd organized a block party. Not just any block party, a community safety celebration designed to show neighborhood solidarity against the ongoing threat I apparently represented. She'd rented tables, hired a catering service, even arranged for a bouncy castle for the kids. The whole event was scheduled for the evening before our restraining order hearing, like a pre-victory celebration. I watched from my porch as neighbors I'd hoped to befriend gathered in the street, eating barbecue and laughing while their children played games 50 yards from my front door. The message was crystal clear. This was their community, and I wasn't welcome in it. Crystal held court at the center of it all, accepting congratulations like she'd just liberated the neighborhood from an occupying army. She wore a flowing sundress that made her look wholesome and maternal, the perfect image of American suburban motherhood protecting her community from external threats. The local news crew showed up again, filming what they called a heartwarming display of community unity in the face of adversity. Crystal gave another interview, this time surrounded by smiling neighbors and playing children, describing how working together had helped them address safety concerns. "Tomorrow's hearing will hopefully provide the legal protection our families deserve," she concluded, speaking directly to the camera with the confidence of someone who believed they'd already won. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Crystal had invited her extended family to the party. I recognized them from social media stalking: her parents, 2 sisters, even her teenage nephew who'd driven up from Milwaukee. She was treating this like a genuine celebration, confident that tomorrow's court appearance would result in my banishment from Pine Ridge Lake. The party lasted until nearly midnight, with neighbors taking turns congratulating Crystal on her courage and leadership in dealing with the situation. I sat in my darkened kitchen, watching through the window as people I'd wanted to build friendships with celebrated what they believed was my impending exile. But while Crystal was basking in premature victory, my phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Uncle Jake, you needed to see tonight's footage. She just gave us enough evidence to put her in prison." Turns out Crystal's block party had been catered by a company that required access to electrical outlets. In her excitement to throw the perfect celebration, she'd given them permission to run extension cords across my property line, technically trespassing on my land without permission. More importantly, Danny's hidden microphones had recorded hours of Crystal bragging to her family and friends about her campaign against me. She'd admitted to every act of vandalism, every fake complaint, every lie she'd told to destroy my reputation. "I made sure that bastard couldn't stay," she'd told her sister while standing 20 feet from my bedroom window. "Whatever it took to protect our neighborhood." Tomorrow's hearing wasn't going to be about protecting Crystal from me. It was going to be about protecting the entire community from a woman who'd confessed to multiple felonies while throwing herself a victory party. Crystal thought she was celebrating her triumph. Instead, she'd just recorded her own confession. The community center buzzed with anticipation Thursday evening, packed tighter than a construction site porta-potty during lunch break. 43 neighbors filled every folding chair, plus standing room for the overflow crowd that Crystal's media campaign had attracted. The local news crew had returned, positioning cameras to capture what they expected would be Crystal's final victory over the neighborhood menace. Crystal stood at the front podium wearing a navy blazer that screamed trustworthy authority figure, her platinum hair pulled into a professional bun. She'd arranged the meeting like a corporate presentation, complete with a projector screen and a stack of printed materials that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I slipped in through the back door and took a seat in the last row, drawing stares and whispers from neighbors who clearly expected me to have been banished by now. The restraining order hearing that morning had been postponed due to new evidence requiring review, something Sarah had arranged to give us this perfect public venue. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crystal began, her voice carrying across the room with practiced authority, "tonight we conclude our efforts to restore safety and peace to our beloved community." She clicked her remote, and the projector displayed a slideshow titled, "Community Standards, a Success Story." The first slide showed a professional photo of Pine Ridge Lake at sunset, looking like something from a vacation brochure. "3 months ago, our neighborhood faced an unprecedented threat to our way of life," she continued, advancing to photos of my property taken from dramatic angles. "One individual's reckless behavior endangered everything we've worked to build here." The crowd murmured approval as Crystal detailed my supposed crimes: the lumber pile that violated community aesthetics, the power tools that disrupted peaceful enjoyment, the surveillance activities that made families feel unsafe. Every lie was delivered with conviction that would have impressed televangelists. "But through unity and determination," Crystal announced triumphantly, "we've successfully addressed these concerns. The individual in question will be legally required to cease all threatening behavior, and our community can return to the peace we deserve." Applause rippled through the room as neighbors congratulated themselves on their collective victory. Crystal beamed like she'd just announced world peace, basking in what she believed was her moment of ultimate triumph. That's when I stood up. "Before this becomes official," I said, walking slowly toward the microphone, "I think there's something everyone should know." Crystal's face went pale as November frost. "You're in violation of the restraining order by being here," she protested, though we both knew the hearing had been postponed. "Actually," I replied, reaching the podium, "I have every legal right to be here, especially since I own this place." I pulled out Crystal's lease agreement and held it up so the room could see the official letterhead. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. "Crystal, how long have you lived at 847 Lakeshore Drive?" I asked conversationally. "2 years, but that's completely irrelevant," she started. "And who do you pay rent to?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for water. "Pinnacle Property Management, but I don't see what—" "And who owns those properties?" I nodded to Sarah Olivia, who activated the projector from her laptop. The screen filled with official property records showing Lakeshore Properties LLC as the owner of Crystal's address, with my name listed as the principal. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the stunned room, "meet my tenant." The gasps were audible throughout the community center. Neighbors turned to stare at Crystal, whose face had transformed from pale to bright red like a traffic light changing signals. "That's impossible!" she shrieked, lunging for the lease agreement. "You can't be my landlord!" I handed her the eviction notice Sarah had prepared that morning. 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations, including harassment of neighbors and destruction of property. The room erupted in confused murmurs as neighbors tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Bob Henderson stood up from the middle section, his voice cutting through the chaos. "She tried to bribe me to lie about Jake," he announced. "Offered me $200 to file fake complaints." That opened the floodgates. Margaret from down the street admitted Crystal had coached her testimony. Tom from the corner house revealed she'd threatened to target his family if he didn't support her campaign. One by one, neighbors began confessing how Crystal had manipulated them into participating in her harassment scheme. But the final blow came when Sarah activated Danny's surveillance compilation. The projector screen filled with high-definition footage of Crystal vandalizing my property, destroying my mailbox, painting my truck, and systematically terrorizing the person who literally owned her house. The audio was even more damning. Crystal's recorded confessions from the block party, bragging about her campaign of destruction while celebrating what she thought was her victory. "Sometimes bullies pick on the wrong person," I said, addressing the news camera that was capturing every moment of Crystal's public humiliation. "Crystal spent 3 months terrorizing her own landlord while paying me rent every month. I guess she should have checked who she was declaring war against." Crystal stood frozen at the podium, her perfect facade crumbling like a house built on sand. The eviction notice trembled in her hands as the reality of her situation finally sank in. She'd just been exposed as a fraud, a criminal, and an idiot in front of 40 witnesses, 2 news cameras, and the entire community she'd claimed to protect. The war was over, and Crystal had lost everything. Crystal's complete meltdown that night became local legend. She screamed denials for another 10 minutes while the surveillance footage played on repeat, showing her crimes in glorious high-definition detail. When she finally stormed out, she slammed the community center door so hard the building's fire alarm briefly went off. A fitting soundtrack for the end of her reign of terror. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal. Within 72 hours, Crystal had packed up her glass palace and disappeared like smoke, not even waiting for the full 30-day eviction period. Turns out facing criminal charges and civil lawsuits while your neighbors know you're a sociopathic liar tends to motivate quick relocations. The local news story went viral faster than a construction site accident video. "Woman harasses own landlord for months" became the most watched segment in Channel 12's history, shared across social media with comments ranging from "How stupid can you be?" to "This is why I mind my own business." Crystal became an internet meme, the poster child for what happens when Karens pick fights with the wrong people. My business phone started ringing again within a week. Turns out being the contractor who stood up to his psychotic tenant was excellent marketing. Everyone wanted to hire the guy with enough backbone to fight neighborhood terrorists. 3 major renovation projects materialized from homeowners who'd seen the news coverage and decided they needed someone who doesn't back down from crazy. The legal resolution came together like a well-built house. Crystal settled the civil lawsuit for $28,000 rather than face trial and inevitable prison time for her federal crimes. She signed a written confession admitting to every act of harassment, vandalism, and defamation, plus agreed to a permanent restraining order that barred her from contacting me or returning to Pine Ridge Lake. The criminal charges were more satisfying: filing false reports with the IRS, insurance fraud, vandalism, harassment. Crystal faced enough felony counts to keep prosecutors busy for months. She plea bargained down to 18 months of probation and 300 hours of community service, though I heard through the legal grapevine that she violated probation within 6 months and ended up serving actual jail time. The neighborhood transformation was remarkable. Once Crystal's manipulation was exposed, Pine Ridge Lake became the community I'd originally hoped for. Neighbors who'd testified against me sheepishly apologized, bringing casseroles and offering to help repair the damage Crystal had caused. Bob Henderson organized a genuine welcome barbecue, not like Crystal's fake victory celebration, but a real community gathering where people actually wanted me there. We grilled burgers, shared stories, and laughed about how close they'd all come to exiling the wrong person. "You know what the crazy part is?" Bob said, flipping steaks while kids played on the dock. "Crystal could have just been a normal neighbor and none of this would have happened. Instead, she declared war on the one person who could destroy her whole world. The community decided to create an actual homeowners association, a real one, with proper bylaws, elected leadership, and legal authority. They asked me to serve on the board, which felt like the ultimate vindication after Crystal's fake committee had tried to fine me into submission. 6 months later, I used Crystal's settlement money to fund something that would have made her absolutely furious: a community improvement project. We built a new playground by the lake, installed better lighting along the walking paths, and established a neighborhood watch program, a legitimate one that actually helped people instead of targeting them. The playground dedication ceremony was pure small-town perfection. Kids swarmed the new equipment while parents shared stories about how much safer and happier the neighborhood felt without Crystal's toxic presence poisoning every interaction. I found true peace in my lakeside cabin, finally enjoying the retirement I'd planned. The sunrise coffee routine became sacred again, watching loons call across water that reflected nothing but possibility. My woodworking hobby flourished, and I even started teaching basic carpentry skills to neighborhood kids whose parents trusted me completely. The best epilogue came 8 months later, a letter from Crystal's new landlord in Arizona. She'd started the same harassment pattern with fresh victims, but they'd Googled her name and found our story. Armed with knowledge about her methods, they'd documented everything and evicted her within 60 days. Sometimes justice spreads like good news in small towns, one story at a time, protecting future victims from predators who think they can terrorize their way to control. Have you ever dealt with a neighborhood nightmare? Share your HOA horror stories in the comments below. You're not alone, and sometimes the people causing problems are more vulnerable than they appear. Subscribe for more stories about underdogs who fight back and win, because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home.